I might just pass over to Daryl now for a bit of an update on the strategy in the council.
Thank you, Greg. So, by way, I guess, of a preamble of where we sit with fruit flies, looking at the hort innovation industry stats from 15-16 year, we've got about $5 billion of potentially fruit fly effective production in Australia, nearly $1 billion of which is ultimately exported. Now, of course, we have two fruit flies in Australia, the Queensland fruit fly and the Mediterranean fruit fly, that already cause our industries a major impact. But we are also fortunate to have a number of areas in Australia that are either only limited in the impacts they feel from fruit flies or are recognised as pest-free. Now, it's because of the relevance of these pests to a broad range of Plant Health Australia's member industries that PHA has taken over many years a strong leadership role to promote a collective action to dealing with these. Not only looking at the exotic threats, of which there are a number, but to make sure we have the best possible management system within Australia. The National Fruit Fly Strategy itself was put out in 2008 and presented a bit of a pathway towards a cooperative approach. And the National Fruit Fly Council has been established to drive progress against that. So the National Fruit Fly Council, which is basically my role as National Manager, has been set up to monitor how Australia is progressing against this National Fruit Fly Strategy and try and drive a cooperative approach. It's a 3-year project within Plant Health Australia, and at the moment we have another 6 months to run, and I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. What the council does in effect is bring together grower representatives. We've got 6 growers on our council that come from various agricultural, horticultural regions across the country, state governments, federal government and research funders to consider what is going on and make sure that as a group we are essentially collaborating, that we are aware of the developments in various jurisdictions, but also aware of the needs. And I guess I can clarify that when we look at challenges over the last few years in areas like the Greater Sunraysia pest-free area. The invasion of fruit flies into there has been a major challenge to producers who have not had to deal with this pest before. There's a lot of knowledge they need to take up and support they need. And through the council, these are issues that we can discuss and try and help the growers in these areas understand where the resources are and essentially build those bridges. The council, by way of its representation, is also positioned to influence what is going on in the national policy space and try and push some of the strategic issues, of which I've listed just a couple of the big ones at the moment on the bottom of this slide. Issues like SIT, most of us will be well aware of the facility that's been built in Port Augusta and the work to develop a male-only strain of Queensland fruit fly, essentially bringing that technology up to world's best practice. But it poses policy challenges. How and where we'll apply this technique. So these are issues that the council can discuss and through state and industry perceptions help to influence the Commonwealth and where we move into the future for this. Considering the range of exotic risks, oriental fruit fly occurs just across the Torres Strait. We want to make sure it stays out, and so the support for Commonwealth and state government programs to do that, and of course the cost shared response, again, are things that the National Fruit Fly Council is working to influence and support. But the last point there is also looking at the long-term outlook. It's not just about defending where we're at now, but trying to plan very much into the future. You know, what will be the position we have on Mediterranean fruit fly, the only exotic fruit fly to have permanently established in Australia. And so the council's looking to consider whether or not that might be an eradicable species and promulgate, I guess, a little bit of a discussion at the national level around that opportunity. I mentioned at the start that the council has 6 months to run under its current funding arrangement, and we are looking at putting forward a proposal for innovation to continue the council. The membership is highly supportive of what's going on, but we realise it remains early days for improving fruit fly management in Australia, and we think that the council still has a lot of value to add to the system. There are a couple of projects I'd like to draw attention to as well, one of which is the review of the new National Fruit Fly Strategy. The strategy, as I mentioned earlier, was produced in 2008. Following it was a whole range of documents. We've had a cost-benefit analysis, we've had an action plan that looked at key projects to progress towards this strategy, had a cost-benefit analysis of that action plan. We've got a strategy for management of Torres Strait fruit flies and a cost-benefit analysis around that. And the Plant Biosecurity CRC also put together an RD&E plan to highlight some of the activities that could be done. We are looking at, within the Council and with support from the Federal Department, an opportunity to review the National Fruit Fly Strategy, consider what's changed over the last decade, and essentially try and consolidate all of these bodies of knowledge into one point. So rather than sorting through what is now about 7 or 8 documents, we actually have one really good go-to point that refers to where we're at, where we want to go, and what our plan for getting there will be. The other major project, and Rod brushed on it very briefly, was the Fruit Fly Code of Practice. Now, for clarity, this is a project that has been funded by the Federal Department to PHA, but it is one that the Council has a great deal of interest in, and through my role has sought to provide some, strategic input into. The Code of Practice ultimately dictates the way we surveil and respond to potential incursions of fruit flies in pest-free areas. And in particular, it was set up for the former tri-state area covering New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. Of course, the relevance of that is now primarily limited to South Australia. The code has a lot of interesting information around how you set out traps and basic information around programs, and the State Departments take that through to a full operational manual. What the review of the Code of Practice is working to do, though, is to update those practices, make sure they remain fit for practice. They are very, very good, but maybe we can do that a little bit better. But perhaps the most, exciting part is to make available aspects of the Code of Practice available to stakeholders with a genuine need to know. So the picture I've got up there on this slide, it may be a little bit hard to take in the detail, is essentially a web-based portal which would present access to components of the Code of Practice. The bits that are up there at the moment are traps and lure types, and essentially saying that if you're a producer in a pest-free area, this is what a fruit fly trap looks like, and here's the reason we actually have the states run them. But in the future, the hope is that we can also expand that out to new management models, such as low pest prevalence, pest-free places. And it will be very important then for producers who may be installing or maintaining these traps or sending submissions to state departments for identification to know how those components of the system works. So really the Code of Practice is, again, about updating our practices, increasing the transparency around those, and making sure that it's not just a government-run system, but one that really is representative of partnership in biosecurity. Which brings me to the infamous now question slide.
No questions?
No questions, apparently.
No questions for fruit flies. Got to be a first.